You can tell I'm back to my traditional Sunday filming because I have flubbed the intro to this like 5 times in a row. I am clearly not awake and functioning enough for this, but we're gonna do it anyway because I like tradition. So, hello everybody. It's time for another reading wrap-up. I've read, honestly, a lot of stuff over the last 2 weeks. I just haven't been finishing a lot of them. I haven't finished any of the books that I said I was going to. And that's what happens when you try to read 8 or 9 things all at once while doing buddy reads, while reading large things. I did it to myself. Anyway, let's talk about what I did manage to finish over the last 2 weeks. First up, I read Blue in Search of Nature's Rarest Color by Kupferschmidt. This is translated from German. I forgot to write down the translator's name, so I will try to dig that up for you. This is, I guess if this was like published 200 years ago, we would have called it a monograph. It is a pretty short nonfiction book all about the color blue, sources of blue, what historically people have used for blue pigments, the discovery of new blues, like new chemical blues in the modern age. It's really interesting stuff, actually. It didn't like completely blow me away, but I did like this deep dive on a single color and one that is genuinely so different. There's a reason why blue is special, and this book explains why. So I found it very fascinating in terms of just learning more about a color. That is something I've been quite interested in recently. I'm not sure that it is like the most amazing thing ever though. Anyway, I would recommend this if you are interested in color and where colors become naturally, but also scientific breakthroughs with color. It's just really interesting. Then I read The Sea and the Bells by Pablo Neruda, translated by William O. Daly. I've been working my way through the bilingual poetry editions that William O. Daly has translated for Copper Canyon Press. I forget how many of them I've read now. A lot of these were from very late in Neruda's life. Things like this and The Winter Garden, they have almost like melancholy, reflective tone to them. I gather Neruda was very much trying to put together multiple collections at the end of his life. He knew he was dying, I guess. And so a lot of these have a theme to them, which I didn't really connect with. I did like The Winter Garden, but The Sea and the Bells, I think there was maybe one poem in this that really struck home for me. And it's not to say that Neruda's poetry isn't beautiful, that it isn't meaningful. He is definitely one of like my favorite poets right now because I do enjoy everything I've read by him. But I think on a deeper level, I just didn't connect with a lot of these, even though I could read the Spanish poems and go, oh, that's interesting, and read the English translation and get more out of it. I'm not gonna say it really fell flat, it just didn't really transcend words on the page for me a lot of the time. And I think that's because of the theme of this. Just, it's not the right theme for this point in my life, probably. Nevertheless, I did like this, even though it was probably my least favorite of Neruda's poetry collections I've read so far. I will continue reading more of these, and I think I'm going to turn and maybe try to pick a few of his titles that were from earlier or mid in his career, and not just the ones from like the 70s at the end of his life. So yeah, it was interesting, but not as good as like the Book of Questions. Next up is An Immense World by Yong, which I absolutely loved. And also, I think I've read like 3 or 4 5-star books in January. That's amazing. I haven't had a month this good in so long, but I've just really been enjoying nonfiction, I guess. So An Immense World is about animal senses. It's all about how animal senses allow them to perceive the world differently from us, and kind of human struggle with even acknowledging that other senses beyond our own exist. This was just amazing. Every time I walk my dog now, I'm like, she's experiencing the world in such a different way because of smell. So yeah, this is fascinating. Yong is just a brilliant science writer. I highly recommend his previous book, I Contain Multitudes, as well. I'm not sure what had him pivot into writing about like animal perception after like the microbes inside of us or whatever. But I really enjoyed this. I picked up this book purely because Ed Yong wrote it, not necessarily because the topic super appealed to me, but it was genuinely really informative, and just, I was hooked. I wanted to keep listening to the audiobook of this constantly. The audiobook, by the way, is narrated by Ed Yong himself, and I really enjoyed that. I am not often a fan of authors narrating their own works unless they have like the training and the voice to really do audiobook narration. Not everybody's voice is suited to that, but I love listening to Yong's voice. It just was great. So I think he was a perfect choice for narrating his own book. But yeah, highly recommend this. Just really opens up your eyes, no pun intended, to the world around us that we cannot perceive because our senses aren't attuned to those things, but then realizing there's this whole world of animals around us that see and experience the world so differently in ways that we can barely even comprehend, and we have overlooked them for so long because we can't comprehend that. We don't have those senses or that depth of sense. So really, really fantastic, and I need more books by Ed Yong now. Then I finally finished a science fiction novel. I read Edge of Dark by Brenda Cooper, which is a bit of a random thing. I had this bookmarked for a really long time because I'd never read anything by Brenda Cooper. Finally got into it, and it caught my attention, but ultimately left me kind of hanging in some way. And I think it's because this is like transhumanism science fiction, a genre that I have struggled with before. Like, I read Ramaznam's trilogy some years ago, which is along very similar lines to this, and just sometimes it's done well and I like it, sometimes it just doesn't seem quite believable. I think that's ultimately my issue with this book. So it's essentially very, very far in the future. Humanity has colonized like a different solar system. They've pretty much forgotten where Earth is, and they have created AI, or extremely enhanced post-humans, that they then forced out of the solar system. And the ice pirates, the next, are now coming back and taking what they think is theirs, essentially. So it is humans create or inspire this next evolution of what comes after humanity, reject it, and then it comes back to bite them because they're in competition and they're gonna fight a war, basically. So this follows some people who are entangled in these events when the next come back into the solar system and start making demands. And the part of the story where I went, do I really like this, was when humans basically get kidnapped and turned into robots or cyborgs to make a point, to make them into ambassadors or whatever to the rest of humanity. And it just didn't sit very well with me. I think there were just some assumptions, some really big leaps in logic and how this sort of situation would happen. I didn't find a lot of it that believable. And it may also be because I don't have a really, really good grounding of the history of this world. I didn't realize until I was most of the way through this book that it's actually a series that comes after another series that already established the world and history and a lot of the people who are mentioned here. So Edge of Dark is its own story. You can read it without having read the previous books, but it felt like the depth of the world just would have worked more for me if I had read the previous stories and really understood more how people got to the point where they are now in the story. So aside from the fact that this is a kind of science fiction that I struggle with a little bit, I'm just not as interested in the topics and I find them difficult to execute well. I kind of want to finish this duology. There is one more book, and it has made me curious about the first series in this world as well, and maybe I would like them, so I may continue on. We'll see. It really depends on whether I can get my hands on the books from the library, because this is like the only book by Brenda Cooper I can get right now. So I may or may not continue. I will let you know. And lastly, we have a novella that I don't think I understood at all, and that's on me. It is, and this is How to Stay Alive by Shingai and Njeri Kagunda. This is one of the Neon Hemlock Press novellas, which is why I picked it up. I thought, that's an interesting cover, interesting title, let's do it. Essentially, it is about a young woman reacting to the suicide of her younger brother, and she is given a drink that allows her to go back in time temporarily, where of course she is trying to convince her brother to not take his life, and then popping back into the future or the present day and dealing with the grief of the situation and that she can't seem to change the past. So I think the story is very much about grief and loss and just how do you react to that? How do multiple generations of people react to it as well? And so it was quite melancholy and sad at times, and I just feel like the way that it was written, the way that it jumped around a lot, and kind of the experimental style of it just kept me from really understanding what was going on. One thing about this that I found impenetrable, but I also liked the idea of it in theory, is that it is almost like bilingual. People are speaking in other languages and there's no translation given for that. It's just they're very fluidly bilingual or trilingual, and so they have conversations. They just flit in and out of these other languages. And I really like how that is represented in a story like this. I wish that more books would do that. Do I always want to know what people are actually saying? Sure. But I think it's a really good way of representing how people actually communicate, and I like that. And I like that it doesn't exoticize languages that aren't English, you know. However, there was a lot of it in this, and so I felt like there was quite a bit of dialogue, like these family members talking to each other, where I didn't really understand what they had said to each other, only kind of hinted at in the reaction that was given afterwards. So I don't know. It was definitely an interesting read and not my usual kind of book, but I'm glad that I tried it. I'm definitely interested in trying more things from Neon Hemlock, because I think it's diverse, it's different, and it's not just a whole bunch of Tor.com novellas, you know. Every press gets their own style and their own kind of authors, and this is something really different. So I tried it, but I think a lot of it just completely went over my head because I'm not really a fan of a lot of experimental writing. And like I said, that's on me, not on the story itself, not on the writer or anything. So that is it for what I have finished over the past 2 weeks. I have been plugging away at a bunch of other things. A really quick update on a few. I have hit the halfway point on Godel Escher Bach by Hofstadter, which my goal is to read this year, and my plan is to finish it by the end of February. I was going to read it in about 6 weeks, but I have really slowed down recently. I've skipped reading from this every day so that I can devote time to other books. So yeah, I am currently buddy reading Asesinato en el Orient Express, which is the Spanish translation of Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I'm reading this with Shannon. It's going to be a long-term read because we are kind of just reading one chapter every 2 days or so, and I'm also really enjoying this. I'd completely forgotten I had read the original English book like 6 years ago. I was like, this is familiar, but not that familiar. I don't know, but I'm really enjoying it. And there's something about reading a story that, like, you know the rough outlines of it, but when you read it in another language, you pay attention to very different things while you're reading. And that is really interesting to me. So I'm having fun with this, and yeah. I've got a bunch of other things on the go that I hope to finish. I'm excited about a bunch of things, including a book on Ernst Haeckel's artwork that I got this past week, and I'm so excited about it. So more on that in the future. But for now, I'm going to get some housework done and then read and then work on jigsaw puzzles. So I hope you've had a great weekend. I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.